Welcome everyone to another episode of Inside R&E. I am your host, Michael Pensabene. Today's edition is Inspiring Spaces with Inspiring People. And I'm very pleased to introduce our guest today, Craig Deitelzweig, who is the President and CEO of Marx Realty and Merchants National Properties. Craig, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Before we talk about office space and your work, I have to share with our listeners how this podcast came to be, because it's a great story. Craig was gracious enough to invite me to the grand opening of new amenity space at 10 Grand Central. And when I came up here, I was absolutely blown away. It's incredible space, and I'll let him describe it to you, but it happens to be that there's a podcast gallery in this amenity space available to his tenants. And once I saw it, I fell in love with it. I said, Craig, we have to do a podcast here. So I'm very honored to be the first podcast in the new podcast gallery.
Yes, both of us. I'm honored too.
Fantastic. That's great. So this is it. We're breaking it in and giving it a trial run.
Right.
But this podcast booth is really part of a much larger concept that you have here at 10 Grand Central. And it's unique, and I think it really sets you apart from other office space in the city. And for our listeners who aren't able to actually view it, can you walk us through it and just describe it for us, please?
Sure. Well, the main crux of the place is based on the town hall, which we call the Grand Gallery. And that was probably the most difficult room to imagine, because we didn't want it to feel corporate. And we also wanted to relate to the luxury train line that was the inspiration here. So what you will see in this space is the ceilings are concave, the way that they would be on a train car. And then we also have Guastavino tile-inspired artwork, which is copper, and then was oxidized in place. And then all the chairs and all the seating, we have couches and we have love seats and things like that, which you wouldn't really see in a typical town hall. So we tried to bring all of those elements in and also make the space feel warm and inviting too. And it has state-of-the-art technology and more speakers than people that could fit in there. And it seats about 150 to 200 people. And then elsewhere in the space, there's a lounge space with a bar. It's a semicircular bar with elements that you would see from the 1930s, but in a modernized way. And then also throughout the space, you'll see lots of beveled mirrors. And those mirrors are also based on the 1930s. You would see them in a lot of train cars from that time period. And we even have some of them on the ceiling when you just get off the space, off in the elevator corridor as well. So we wanted, the second you get off the elevator, to feel the grandeur of the space and know that you're entering something really special. So there's uplights and lots of details on the ceiling there as well.
How did you come to build this out? What was the idea and concept?
Well, for this particular floor, what we were thinking was we have another floor of amenities, which is on the 7th floor of the building. And that's really, I think, was really one of the first buildings in New York to really have these type of amenities available for tenants and really marry hospitality and office, which I think is what we're known for. And so it's gotten such great use that you can't even sit there anymore. It's just full.
Really?
Yeah. First it was just full in the summer, outdoors on the terrace. Now it's full all the time. And so we thought we should really add to that, to the amenity offerings of the building. And then what we keep hearing, not just in New York, but in every market, is that tenants really want a space for about 150 to 200 people. That's a town hall type space. So
Right.
If you have an office that is based in London and you have a New York office, you want everyone to get together, they need a space that's for that. So that was really the catalyst for this. And then we went crazy.
I was going to say, you just didn't create space. You created very unique space.
Yeah.
And, for those who are listening and aren't able to actually view in, this vibe, it's like an Art Deco vibe to it that really brings you, to an era that's, it's nostalgic. It really
Right.
is. And it's very comfortable space. It doesn't feel like a sterile office amenity. This is some place where you're comfortable, and there are couches and lounge areas. There's a bar, there's a conference, there's a movie theater, there's a movie room in this amenity space. So how is this space being used? What are you doing with it? How are your tenants using it?
Well, first, back to why this space looks the way it does. is the building was built in the 1930s. Elie Jacquin was the architect.
Oh.
And what we like to do in all of our buildings is really embrace the heritage of the property. So all of our buildings look different. So they all are based on what the building should be, what the soul of the building is. So what we did here, and we're connected to Grand Central, was, and because the building was built in the 1930s, we really looked at the building as a luxury train car, this floor.
Right.
So what did luxury train cars look like in the 1930s? And there's the Mercury liner, there's the 20th century luxury liner, and the Orient Express. So we took all of those, and that's why the ceilings have the details they do. That's why this room has the fan images that it does from the 1930s.
Right.
The floors are that way.
Right.
But we didn't want it to be sort of, Disney World. We wanted it to be a modern version of that. So that's really how this all came to be. And then we just kind of went with it. And then, for the town hall, initially we wanted a reception area for the town hall, a space for people to gather, and a loungy type of space. And then that loungy type of space then was like, we should really have a podcast studio. A lot of our tenants actually do podcasts. So we thought that would be used a lot. And
Right.
the screening gallery, I just thought it was cool. And I knew I would want it. And that's kind of what we look at a little bit too. Like, what would me as a tenant, what would I appreciate? And you mentioned, it's cozy and warm, and,
Right.
and that really was 8 years ago. That's kind of how we started thinking about office buildings. We know that tenants don't want that white sterile or gray sterile building with the bright lights, and you feel like you're going into
Right.
the doctor's office, or worse, an airport. A lot of them feel that way, and we just didn't want to have that feel, and we wanted it to feel like a hotel and feel very sort of comfortable and induce people to come back to work that way.
Yeah, you get that feeling when you walk in the building, and I have to say, when I walked in today, the first thing that hits you is that you have scents that are infused in with the air, and it smells calming. It feels welcoming and calming when you walk in, and you get that feeling as if you're walking into a hotel.
Right.
I mean, is that something that you do throughout the entire building, or?
Not the entire building, but we do it in all of our common areas. But it does actually, go through the elevator shaft, so it does kind of.
It lingers there with you for a
yeah.
little bit. Yeah, it's
When we first introduced the scent and I came home, my wife was like, "You smell so good," and she was like hugging me a lot. So there's a lot of benefits.
that's good.
Yeah,
You get hugs. You go home and get more hugs when you.
Well, this is kind of a funny story. So we also own 545 Madison.
Okay.
And so in all of our buildings, we have the Marx scent, which you're referring to. But in that building, we actually entered into a partnership with Baccarat. It's the first co-branded office building with a luxury brand.
Wow.
So, sort of similar how hotels are. And as part of that deal, Baccarat really wanted their signature scent to replace the Marx signature scent. And we agreed because it was a full Baccarat office building. And
The tenants complained.
well, what's actually really fascinating is we have a tenant, a potential tenant who walked in and was like, "Is that the Baccarat scent I smell?" And we're like, "Yes." And then he actually lives in a Baccarat residence. And so, we had him at the first whiff, we kind of joke. So.
Yeah, and I don't know anybody else who has thought of adding scent to office space as a means to attract, and apparently it's working. So,
I heard of one office landlord who does it because their building smells poorly. They're trying to counter that, but yes. But I think it makes all the sense in the world. It really should make all of your senses should be impacted when you walk into a building.
yeah, and I have to say, when we were talking about this podcast, I was surprised to learn how personally involved you were with every detail and aspect of this.
Right.
But that's not your background. I mean, I know you, and from what I know, you started off being a lawyer working at Skadden. So,
Right.
So what is your background? How did you come to be in this position here today, where you're now creating office-infused, hospitality-infused office space? It's quite a remarkable journey that you've been on.
Yeah. So, I started as a lawyer, a real estate lawyer, so there was some similarities.
Right.
And then I went to a developer, and when I went there, they put me in charge of our Boston assets, which at the time were our worst performing assets. And they were just like, do something, So basically, I had the opportunity to reposition all of those assets, and found out pretty quickly that it had an aptitude for it. And so, and really, as a customer, you go into a building and you're sort of like, why did they do this? And it was sort of had the opportunity to repair all of that and sort of look at buildings. And I started doing it there. So our buildings in Boston at that time were the first boutique office buildings, is what we called them at that time. And so we didn't go all out the way we do today. I think the world wasn't ready for it.
Right.
And when we did it here, we worked with the architects really had, they were like, no. Like they really had a hard time at first. It was sort of, that's not office. And what we found, though, is there's this real convergence of all of the different asset classes, whether it's retail, office, or hospitality, all coming together. And this was really one of the first buildings that did that. And then we learned from this and grew upon it. So this floor was, in a way, more of a challenge than just doing it originally, because we already did it. And so how do you take it to the next level was how we were thinking.
And it's really, in my view, it's really stepping out, because it's a lot of square footage that you've committed now to providing amenity space. And it needs to be used for that to make sense. And I can tell you've spared no expense in building this out. Is this just for tenants in the building, or is it open to the public? How is this space being used? How do you maximize the return on what you put into the building?
Right. I mean, for the first floor, which we call the Ivy Terrace, our 7th floor, we didn't think it would be profitable. We weren't thinking we would make any money off of the space. It was just an amenity for the building. We hope they used it. We provide free coffee, cappuccino, and gelato to get folks there, which really works. And then, and then we found out that folks use it so much, and they had so many parties, and then we would charge for the parties for them to use the entirety of the space. And we also had a lot of filming crews in our spaces.
Really?
So, yeah. So a lot of films TV shows are filmed in our offices. Just this week, Elsbeth is filmed in our offices. So with Matthew Broderick is his name. Matthew Broderick, Ferris Bueller. So it becomes income producing. And then here, we want to build great space and have the tenants use it. They do have to rent it. So our 7th floor largely is free for the day unless they rent out the whole space. Right. But this, they actually have to rent it. So, and there's different charges for the different rooms. And then we also have a lot of building type events, which are complimentary, of course. And then we open it up to outsiders as well. So lots of tech companies, for instance, will rent the whole space, and they do it well in advance. Right. And then there's a bar here, and we're also looking to activate the bar. So what
does that mean, activate? What are you activating?
So we want people to really use it. So we're in really advanced, more than conversations, advanced LOIs with a group that would run the bar. It's probably one of the best bar operators in the city, and it would be a speakeasy.
Oh wow!
So a very cool concept, and but we probably will be able to announce something in about 3 months.
Wow, that's fun. I'm looking forward to that, because my office is right across the street.
Yeah, and I think there's a real need for it too in this area, like something that's a very special place that you'd want to go to that feels adult. And not just another Irish bar. Yeah,
and one other thing that's interesting about 10 Grand Central, and I'd like to talk about it. I noticed before I walked into the building, there was a car parked in front of it with the 10 Grand Central logo on it. It was actually a Porsche. Is that your car?
Yeah, so it's the building's car. So it's a house car that's available to all the tenants in the building. We call it the Marxmobile. And every building we have has a different Marxmobile. So we have a fleet. They're all electric. And they're all complimentary to the tenants. So you book it through your app. We have an app for each building. And you just book it, and you want a car at 10 o'clock, and you want to take it to a meeting. We provide that. And what's also nice about it is it's not just for the C-suite, it's for everybody. It's a truly democratic approach to office space. And we actually think of all of our space that way. In the past, there has been some buildings, 2 buildings I could think of, that did have a sort of club in their building but it was really just for the executive level people.
Right.
And we didn't think that was the right approach. So we want it for everybody. We want everyone to use it. And what's nice about it is, especially during COVID, when folks weren't coming in, our buildings people were coming in because they loved coming here and they loved these spaces, and it became, their second space. And so it was a real advantage for us.
Yeah, and I think that's what's really ingenious about, your approach, which is, you're competing with this remote work environment. And, during COVID, a lot of workers developed a different sense of, not priority, but level of comfort, that they got accustomed to working in more comfortable environments and not sterile, stiff office areas. And how does an office tenant compete with that? How do you get workers to come into the office? And I think here, you're bringing hospitality into the office, and you're bringing those comforts into the office so that they blend together, and that, there's no reason to stay home for level of comfort for working. And in fact, there's a social component to it.
Right, big social component.
It's a big social component that's out of the work environment, but at work, and it allows you to interact with people. And I think there's a synergy there that's being created.
It's even better than that because, most people in New York, they have small apartments or, babies crying, dogs barking, so people don't necessarily want to be in that environment anyway.
Right.
But they do like the comforts of home. So if you can have, hopefully better than the comforts of home here with state-of-the-art technology and all these other offerings. So we early on, it's been at least 2 years that we have been in excess of our in-person occupancy in this building.
Wow.
Yeah. So what also happened during COVID was tenants actually hired a lot. So they have more employees than they had before, and so that's why we're even. I think on certain days we're about 115% of where we were pre-COVID.
Wow.
In terms of physical occupancy. And then we now have in this building 7 tenants who are looking to expand. So there's like this narrative out there that, remote work is a concern. We're not seeing that at all in any of our buildings. We're seeing people wanting to be in the office and tenants needing to expand. So in this building, for instance, we raised rents twice last year, and we're raising them again.
Wow.
And every time we raise rents, we just feel like we haven't done it enough. So we're much higher rents than we were pre-COVID.
And that's interesting because you read a lot about how the city's talking about converting office space to residential because it's not working anymore.
Right.
Do you view this as being the answer in lieu of a different kind of conversion, a different use?
I do.
For the property.
So we do think of it as a conversion. But we think of it as conversion from bad office to amazing office, and you can do it with all different asset classes. So like this building is an older building. This is kind of the type of building that some in government are thinking should be converted to residential, and we don't think so. We think there's a real need for these types of buildings that are modernized, and just like older hotels have. That special heritage that makes you prefer that to a brand new hotel.
Right.
So long as it's modern, you have that heritage, and if you can bring those out and kind of make it shine, I think that in older properties even better.
Yeah, and I think you're right. Even on a larger scale, it gives the city a competitive edge.
Totally.
Where you have these companies looking for the right place to work, and if remote work is something that's happening, and do they need a footprint in New York City? New York City's a playground, and everybody enjoys being here in New York. And if you could bring that into the office and have that part of the culture, it makes it a very attractive place to do.
Yeah, and I think people have forgotten in like 2018, there was a real concern that there wasn't enough office product in New York. That's why we have Midtown rezoning and all of that. Yeah. And I think that's a real concern again. If you look at the better properties and what the occupancy is in those properties. It's sub 10%, and really 9% is when it becomes a landlord's market. And we hear over and over again from our potential tenants that when they're looking at space, they'll look at 20 buildings, but really at the end of the day, there's really 2 buildings that really meet their needs. So it's very limited. Wow. And I think tenants today are much more concerned about where they're located. So people do want to be by transportation, which is why this Grand Central neighborhood is so terrific. But I think it's more than that, because if you look down the street on Third Avenue, there's a lot of vacancy there. But yeah, we used to be on Third Avenue. We're not anymore. We turned our back to Third. Moved our entrance.
Right.
But I think some of those buildings, if they were redone properly, tenants would definitely want to be there and pay a premium to be there. So I think that some of this is going a little too far.
Okay. What's next in your portfolio? I mean, you mentioned 545 Madison and 10 Grand Central as being your, little jewels in the, in your office space. Is there anything else in the pipeline?
Well, we also repositioned the property in DC called the Herald.
Oh, okay.
And that's just a stunning special property. It was the home of Jackie Kennedy. So she used to work there when she was the inspiring camera girl. And so we really took a lot of inspiration from her in that renovation. So actually in that property, every piece of furniture is based on an object of clothing that she wore. So if she wore a houndstooth dress, then we had a houndstooth chair. And we actually have a book that shows all of that.
Wow.
And that building, what's really special too, is the ceiling heights, because it used to be a printing press building, are just insane. Our biggest challenge there was we're not used to ceiling heights that are 20 feet and 15 feet, that lighting it was so challenging because, it's such a long distance. So it was sort of, we had to become expert in that type of lighting. But we're looking right now to buy more assets in New York. There's two that we're looking at this moment. We think it's a great time to buy office in New York. There's a lot of challenges out there, and we think we have that special formula to make some of these buildings that are challenged into gems.
Oh, that's great. And do you see a trend happening now in New York City? Where do you see the future of office space in New York City going as a whole?
So I think New York City is definitely the best office market in the country. We see tenants from all over the world who want to be here. Finance is growing, exponentially, as is the legal world, and I think New York has turned into this really diverse ecosystem where, whether it's technology, whether it's fintech, whether it's health tech, everyone wants to be here. And so I think there's a really bright future in New York. I do think, though, that there are some sectors of the market here or locations here, like downtown financial district. I don't see a bright future there. I think there it makes a lot of sense for those conversions to go from bad office buildings to residential. But by and large, I think people really want to be in Midtown, and there's a bright future here.
Well, I think that's very helpful information. I know you've been widely recognized in the industry as a notable leader in real estate. I know Cranes gave you an award for that in 2024. So I'm sure all of our listeners will appreciate the advice, and we certainly appreciate you being on the show. Is there any closing advice or remarks you'd like to give our listeners?
I think one of the things I've learned through my career is just sort of to really just think a little differently, because I think we in the real estate industry just have this, for whatever reason, we have this herd mentality. Even right now, it's, everyone's sort of anti-office is the narrative, and you should buy data centers. And then what kind of happens is that supply and demand dynamic, changes, and then it's not really the place to be. So I think just find what you're good at and really focus on that. And I think that for office in particular, especially repositioning offices, I just think there's just so much potential there. And I think it's kind of exciting because there's in New York there's buildings from every different period, and I just think it's exciting. We actually find it a little bit trickier when it's a new glass and steel building to give that sort of sense of place to those types of buildings, because you have to make it up. There's nothing really there that you can sort of lean on the way we could here.
Yeah, and I love how you tap into the history and respect it in the next repositioning and the next,
I think it's important. I think tenants really want that sort of special space, distinctive space, and also space that feels authentic, because oftentimes you'll go into a building and they'll just sort of put in a mid-century, couch just because. But it really doesn't.
It's out of place.
Yeah.
It doesn't go.
Yeah, and it doesn't resonate as a result.
Right.
So we want tenants, when they come in, to really feel that wow, and really like, I want to be part of this and part of this community. We think of it as a club. club for office tenants.
Yeah, and you certainly pick up on that vibe from when the scent hits you when you open the door all the way through the elevators and into this space. It really is unique, and it feels like you're in a special place, not in an ordinary building. So I congratulate you. You've done a fantastic job here and throughout the portfolio, and I look forward to what you're doing next, Craig. And thank you. I really, you know what? I'm really happy that we did this podcast.
Me
It's
too.
the first one in this room, and it's been great.
Thank you.
Thank you.